Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. All right, today I just have a quick topic, probably going to be a shorter episode today, and the topic is when playing a game is sometimes my least favorite thing about board games. This is something that I've been thinking about quite a while, and I know that quite a few people also go through this kind of thought process. I actually asked some of the Dungeon Dive patrons, and they were kind of on the same page as me. At least some of them were. But with board games, I like buying them. I like collecting them, looking at them, exploring them, reading about them, and talking about them. And sometimes I go through phases where I do all of those things more than I actually play them. Sometimes for me, playing a board game, actually kind of feels like work for me. I'm not talking about work as in a job, but a work as in the effort that it takes, maybe compared to the satisfaction I get as a hobbyist. Sometimes just playing a game can actually be the least fun part of the hobby for me. And why is this? So I have a lot of hobbies revolving around different kinds of media. And I think board games are unique in that they take a lot of work to use to their full capacity. They take a lot of work to get the satisfaction out of, kind of like a time cost ratio where the effort I put in due to the pleasure I get out. Rarely does a board game present itself as effortless fun. And those that do, or those that do so better than others, often become favorites. Some recent examples of some games that I like: Role Player Adventure, 6x6 Tales, Expedition to Skull Island, Quest for the Lost Pixel, Morkborg. These are games that have a low barrier to entry. They don't take a lot of effort to get a lot of fun out of them. When I get a new book, I collect books too. I collect some new books, and I do collect like a lot of vintage fantasy and vintage science fiction paperbacks. But when I get a new book, I instantly know how to read it. I don't have to learn how to use a book to enjoy that book. When I get a new movie, I watch. I'll buy DVDs or buy Blu-rays or watch movies on some streaming service. I know how to watch the movie. I know how my DVD player works. I know how my Blu-ray player works. I know how to download a movie. I know how a movie theater works. When I go to watch a movie, it doesn't take a ton of effort to get a maximum amount of joy out of it. I listen to a ton of music. I listen to more new music than almost anybody I know. I have a ongoing policy that has been my policy for probably 20, 30 years, that I want to listen to a brand new album to me. Not a brand new album, but a brand new album to me at least one time a week. I'm constantly discovering new music. But every time I get a new album, I don't have to figure out how to listen to the music. I don't have to work to enjoy the music. And even with video games, I know how to play most games. I know that in a third-person game, the left stick is probably 99% of the time going to control my character on the screen. The right stick is going to control the camera. I know that in most Western developed games, the X or the A button is going to be the select button. I know that in a first-person shooter, the mouse is going to control the camera, and I'm probably going to move around with the WASD keys. The closest analogy really is video games. Video games have a set of standards, as mentioned above. Doom and Quake set FPS standards on the PC, and Half-Life 2 kind of refined them. Halo kind of did this on consoles. We know how to play most first-person shooter games. If you've played Doom, or you've played Quake, or you've played Half-Life, the chances are really good that you can pick up a modern first-person shooter and at least know how to play the game. Other games did similar things for other genres. Demon's Souls and Dark Souls kind of set a standard. Rogue and NetHack kind of set standards. When I get a new video game, I am playing the game moments after pressing the start button, as long as I don't have to sit through unskippable cutscenes. I don't have to spend hours reading about how to play a video game. And then I don't have to spend even more hours going to forums, making sure that the rules are right, or making sure that I know how to press start on my controller, or making sure that the A button is working on my controller. Video games just work. Books, movies, music, those are all hobbies that I enjoy, all medias that I enjoy, that I can just get the thing and start enjoying it right away. Of course, there are exceptions. There are books like House of Leaves that break the rules of how a book works. There are games like Kerbal Space Program, where the whole point of the game is for it to be kind of difficult to learn. But those are rare exceptions. Video games, music, movies, books, they take almost no effort to enjoy. And that's because these forms of media have developed standards over time. And I kind of wonder why board games haven't. Board game designers seem to have this, they seem to fetishize unique qualities. They seem to fetishize the things that make their games different. They almost go out of their way to make things different from the games that inspire them. And I'm not sure why that is. I think board games do a really poor job of training you to play other board games. And that is because there's almost no standards governing how they work. 90% of the games in my collection are basically the same kind of game. Either dungeon dive, either a fantasy or a science fiction themed dungeon crawl or adventure game. If most board gamers came to my room and looked at my shelf of games, they would comment that a lot of my games look the same, and that's the niche that I am in. But almost every single game on my shelf plays completely differently from the others, and that's just crazy. Every new game requires hours of learning to enjoy it the first time. And then you put it back on the shelf and you take it out in a few months, and you have to spend, half that time or maybe a quarter of that time relearning. You have to relearn the game almost every subsequent time you play, or at least relearn parts of it. For some reason, designers of board games, they seem to value novelty in rules and mechanisms above everything else. And when those hours of learning or relearning a game are spent in frustration, it really can ruin the entire experience and make me start to think negatively about the hobby. Games with the same kinds of square pieces or square tiles have completely different ways of how you use those square spaces. For instance, I recently played Vagrant Song and Dungeons of Doria and Dungeon Crusade. All of those games have movement on a square grid on tiles, but two of those games use the diagonals as being adjacent, and one of them doesn't. So that is a standard that three different games, they kind of use in different ways. So if you were to play those games back to back to back, you would have to learn different ways to use square gridded maps. Games that use the same dice have completely different ways to use those dice, have different ways that those dice are read. Sometimes you want to roll high, sometimes you want to roll low, sometimes you only want to roll 5s and 6s. Games in the same universe don't even always train you to play other games in that universe. Massive Darkness 1 does not prepare you at all to play Massive Darkness 2. So why aren't there board game standards? What if designers of certain kinds of games agreed on certain things like how movement works, how adjacency works, how the dice mechanisms are going to work? So let's take an example. I'm going to take an example of a game that is very popular, that has a strong and unique design. It's not a game that I love, but I respect its design, and that is Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven has an engine that could easily be licensed and used in other games with different themes and settings. What if the designer of Gloomhaven licensed out his design, his engine, his Gloomhaven engine to other designers? The original design sets the standards for how movement, combat, exploration, how all of that stuff works. There really is no need for designers to design that stuff from the ground up every time they want to make a new game. If designers could use these pre-existing foundations, then they could spend their time on the stuff that makes games truly unique and memorable. The art, the world, the stories, the characters. These are the things that make a game experience memorable. Nobody really remembers a rule fondly. It's usually the frustrations with the rules that we remember, if we remember the rules at all. Rules and mechanisms should become invisible. What players really remember are the experiences created by the things surrounding the rules and the mechanisms. The designer could then add new wrinkles to spice up their Gloomhaven engine game, and players would only need to learn the new stuff. Playing one Gloomhaven engine game would prepare us for playing other games that use that engine, a lot like how the Dungeons & Dragons adventure game series works. I think that is a really good example of what I am talking about. They could also have a very well-written and organized and indexed rulebook to form the core of their new rulebook, because the rulebook for Gloomhaven is very well done. It's kind of like the exact opposite of what Games Workshop has done with their new line of Warhammer Quest games. Longtime viewers of the Dungeon Dive know that I love Games Workshop. They're my favorite board game company. Warhammer Quest, Silver Tower, and Warhammer Quest, the original, are both in my top 10 games of all time. However, we have 4 modern Warhammer Quest games. We have Shadows over Hammerhall, Blackstone Fortress, Silver Tower, and Cursed City. Only 2 of those are even remotely compatible with each other in terms of components and mechanisms. And the others are so different that you can't even use the enemies and heroes from one game in another. All of those games should have used the same basic engine, and that would have allowed each of the games released to be a kind of large box expansion for the other games. So why did Games Workshop feel the need to so drastically change these games that exist in the same product line? If they were compatible, Games Workshop wouldn't have to waste time designing new mechanisms. Each game would act as an expansion for the other games, as I said, and they win by not wasting time redesigning the wheel, and the players win by not having to waste time learning new mechanisms for each game. We shouldn't have to learn how movement works in every new game we play, or what is considered adjacent, or if rolling high or low is good, or how many items we can equip, or any other number of things that don't really make a gaming experience memorable. When I sit down to enjoy a new book, movie, or piece of music, I can instantly start to think about that thing in a meaningful way. I can instantly engage a new piece of media, a new book, a new movie, a new piece of music. I can engage it on a deep level without having to spend time and effort learning how to enjoy it. That almost never happens with board games. I can get similar things out of board games by just engaging them on a non-gaming level, just looking at the art, maybe reading about the lore, organizing. I can get enjoyment out of the game in certain pieces, but to really use the game and to get its full enjoyment out of it takes a lot of work. Each time I sit down with a new game, or even a game I haven't played in a while, I have to learn how to engage with it again. And that makes me want to engage with them less frequently than I would like to. So instead, I'll just kind of take a game out, set it up, and look at it sometimes. I think this is why the OSR world of RPGs has really taken off. By building upon freely available set of standards, creators don't need to get bogged down with creating new mechanisms. They can just add spice on top of the foundation to make their unique interpretation of those rules, of those mechanisms, more enjoyable for certain groups of players. This frees them up to be totally creative. This is why I'm slowly gravitating towards being more interested in RPGs and these kind of like solo tabletop experiences, these little indie experiences, more than I am big produced board games. These kinds of RPGs and these kinds of little tabletop indie games take far less effort for me to enjoy, but they give me back so much more. So I can learn an entire game of like Scarlet Heroes or Morkborg and relearn them in just a few minutes and have an infinite amount of time playing them. Morkborg with Solitary Defilement takes way less time to learn than even the easiest of dungeon crawl board games, but I get an immense amount of enjoyment out of playing that game. So yeah, what do you guys think about games having a set of standards? If a bunch of board gamers, designers came together who were all making different dungeon crawl games and decided on a set of standards, deciding on, okay, are we going to use hexes or squares? If we're using squares, is adjacent only orthogonal, or does it include the diagonals as well? How many pieces of gear can you equip? How do actions work? How do enemies work? We could come up with these standards and then allow that game engine to be licensed out to other designers who could then take the bare bones structure of a game system and then add their creativity to it for everyone else to enjoy. So that's just a topic I've been thinking about lately, and I hope you enjoyed this kind of quick podcast topic. So we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.